So again, welcome everyone. We're glad that you're here on this chilly night. I am going to introduce the moderator of the program this evening, and then Dr. Smith will introduce the rest of the panelists. So it is my pleasure to introduce Karen Nell Smith, Dr. Karen Nell Smith, and I'll tell you a little bit about her. She is a facilitator with over 30 years experience, so she was actually the perfect person to help us put this program together in partnership with the Brookfield Institute, where she also works. Karen Nell is actually an adjunct professor on campus this semester, teaching a course in dialogue. I know some of you here tonight are enrolled in that. She has been a corporate and conflict management consultant since 1981. And since 1993, she's assisted faith-based organizations representing a number of denominations and traditions throughout New England by providing facilitation and training as they work through issues of conflict, engage in discernment and visioning, or just to strengthen their peacemaking skills. Karen Nell received her Master of Divinity from Andover Newman Theological School and her Doctorate of Ministry at Hartford Seminary. And she also holds certificates in mediation and conflict transformational skills from the Lombard Mennonite Peace Center. And in the past few years, Karen Nell has been a member of Hartford Seminary's Building Abrahamic Partnerships facilitation team. That was actually a course that I was privileged to take when I was a student at Hartford Seminary. And she is also an ordained minister in the United Church of Christ, presently serving as pastor of the Congregational Church of Christ in North Leominster. She is a founding member of the Brookfield Institute. That's the institute that we are partnering with us, a nonprofit organization committed to growing resilient communities, where she is program director of the Institute's Interfaith Engagement Program. So again, Karen Nell, thank you for being here with this evening and for being our moderator as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pilato-Fontaine, and good evening to all of you.
Good evening.
I just want to make sure you're still awake. Okay, I'm very honored to be here this evening, and I'm joining my respected colleagues up here as we focus on the challenges of dialogue. As was mentioned, I've been engaged in this challenge for many, many years in all sorts of places. Businesses and corporations, partnerships, nonprofit organizations, universities, communities of faith, and of course, in my own personal relationships with family and friends. And all of us have. Speaking and listening to each other with respect, especially when we disagree, is one of the greatest challenges that we face. So my role here tonight is to get things started and to give you a little background to this challenge and to tell you what we hope to do tonight. So let's jump right in. And we'll start with a definition of dialogue. Dialogue, engagement with one another, characterized by sincere, honest, and respectful exchange that is committed to holding differences in holistic, relational, and creative tension. Well, that's a mouthful. I'll just point out a few things that are basic here that we can read between the lines. Engagement, right? Active engagement. Honesty, respect, tension, creativity, something holistic, and finally, and perhaps the most important part of the definition, relationship. Because all of those things are important to achieving dialogue. There's another way to think about this, and that's when we know that we're not in dialogue. Whenever we seek to talk about difficult things and we know that there are differences, right, among us, there are differences present, we can feel that tension. We can feel when it's not creative and when it's not respectful, right? Not. Say yes, yes, Professor Smith. We experience it in our families sometimes, right? Around the dinner table, topic comes up, you feel that tension. We can experience it when we look, at what's on television or what we see on the internet, what we're hearing and reading on the internet, right? We can see it or feel it in debates that seem far from dialogue. And we also know that there are times when communication is so broken down that voices have to be raised, or that there has to be some form of action taken, sometimes loud, sometimes even violent, in order to be heard. And too often, our communication feels like this, right? Feels like this. We're either talking loudly over each other, at each other, or we're not listening at all. So that brings me to our hopes for this evening. I am joined here tonight by three of my very, very respected colleagues and also friends in this work of dialogue through difference. In the next few minutes, we're going to be hearing from each one of them, and they'll be sharing about their own learning and their own practices and skills and sensitivities of dialogue. And each one of our presenters brings a unique life experience so that through those different perspectives, we'll have this really unique opportunity tonight to understand just how complex the challenge of dialogue can be. And I'm really incredibly honored and excited to be hearing from them. It's amazing that they're here in this room together with us tonight. And then, after we've heard from each of them, you'll have an opportunity to put some of these skills into practice. We're going to give you an opportunity to have a little bit of a dialogue tonight about a controversial issue, and then we'll all come back together and we'll have a time for questions and answers and conversation as a large group. When I think about the challenge of dialogue, it's important to take a step back and get a broader view. I have often heard people say, oh, why can't they just sit down and talk? You know, you hear that all the time. Israel, Palestine, right? Republicans, Democrats, about immigration or about abortion or about climate change, you name it. This gentleman, Wesley Aryasha, peacemaker and Methodist minister from Sri Lanka who served for years on the World Council of Churches in Geneva, he has said this about dialogue. Dialogue is not an ambulance service. It is a public service. And I think what he's saying there, in other words, what he's saying there is that dialogue is something that we should be learning how to do and doing regularly and preventatively, not just waiting to learn how to do it when there's some terrible conflict that's brewing or worse. So I want to talk a little bit about, from that broad view and taking a step back, about a process of dialogue. There's a Quaker scholar and a peace activist, Adam Curl is his name, who describes this process. So let's look at what he says. He described this process as a journey that involves things like balancing power and raising awareness about all the different points of view and all the different needs and concerns, hearing all the voices, making sure everyone could be in the conversation. And it also involves the changing, this journey involves the changing of relationships and the nature of relationships, from being unpeaceful to being dynamic and stable and creative and peaceful, truly peaceful. The journey starts with education, down at the bottom of the long and winding path. Education about the skills of communication and listening and dialogue. Education about the issue at hand, or the issues at hand. Education about all the different perspectives involved. That's a lot of education, but it's essential to this journey of peace through dialogue. The next leg of the journey he calls confrontation. I call it chaos. And this is where all of a sudden, through our education, we know that there are lots and lots of differences. And here we move from education to encountering one another, right? And boy, right, that's when the tension really begins, right? I know that I don't agree with you and that you have some issues and maybe I've impacted you in some way, and now we're gonna have to face each other face to face. It can be difficult, it can be frightening, it can be risky, even violent, but it's necessary to move through this phase. We have to be able to talk to one another. We have to be able to confront one another and sometimes be discomforted by that in order to really understand someone else's point of view. And it takes a tremendous amount of courage. And this is where we often decide, oh, you know what? It's probably just easier to avoid the conversation altogether. But if we can keep at it, if people can keep at it, and genuinely try to understand each other, even though they disagree, Curl says we can move beyond that to what he calls negotiation or dialogue. And here it is that the voices are more balanced and the power is shared and people know how to speak and listen to each other respectfully so that they can understand each other and work together through their differences. And that's what leads you eventually to sustainable peace. You get to sustainable peace through dialogue. Now I just want to reiterate that this is a long and windy road. And that people often, it's not a straight path at all. People often loop back and loop back and loop back as they learn these skills and they learn more about each other. But that's the road that Curl saw. So, the basis of all of this, going from the big picture now to the small picture, is the skill of deep listening. Deep listening is the most fundamental and essential communication skill there is. And it's fundamental to dialogue. And I'm just going to touch on it briefly, and then my esteemed colleagues are going to go into it in their own way. In a deeper way. We call this deep listening in the world of dialogue because it's the kind of listening that helps you deepen both your own understanding of each other and also your relationship. And here are some key points, okay? In deep listening, you listen 200%. And what we mean by that is that you don't listen and it look like you're listening, but in your own mind, preparing your rebuttal. Or thinking of all the reasons why you don't agree. Or, your laundry list or something else. You are bringing your full self to this task of listening. You also encourage the person who's speaking to share examples and go deeper. Ask questions for specifics so that you can clarify your understanding. And you can also restate what you've heard so that you're sure, you check in to make sure that you have understood not just what they said, but what they meant. And then finally, you're listening to understand, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you agree. You're listening to understand. And that's the most powerful thing you can do, listening to someone else in that way. Because when you listen to someone else in that way, basically what you're communicating to them is that you care about them, that you value them, that you want to understand them, even if their experience or their opinion is very different than your own. And when you listen in that way, it brings out an amazing thing. It's very powerful because the person who's being listened to relaxes, is more open to hearing what you have to say, and the relationship can be strengthened. Now, the reverse is also true. If we don't feel listened to or valued, we feel discounted, right? And that doesn't feel so good. When someone doesn't listen to us or won't listen to us or just talks over us, what's communicated to us is that we're not important, we're not respected, we're not worth anything. And we respond as if we're physically threatened, as if we've been physically threatened. Our behaviors come from some place that some call the reptilian brain. So the kind of behaviors you see when you're discounted in that way are, well, reptilian, right? So we might freeze in place, right? Or we might just, change our colors just to fit in. Or we might just withdraw into ourselves to be protected, right? Or we might lash out, right? You see those behaviors. Have you experienced that? When you feel you experienced it in yourself? When you feel like someone's not listening to you? And that's why learning to listen is so important to dialogue. There's another way to think about that, and that's also that we treat one another with dignity. When you treat someone with dignity, you're basically affirming them. You're valuing them. And these are all the different ways that we can treat people with dignity, and everyone deserves to be treated with dignity. So that brings us to dialogue, and we'll go back to the definition that we started with, where we talked about engagement and respect and honesty and tension and creativity and relationship. The Greek word dialogos, which is the root of the word dialogue, means flowing through words. So that in dialogue, each person receives as well as speaks, shares and receives, and you go back and forth, listening and speaking to each other in that creative tension and in that relationship. It's different than a debate, it's different than discussion, and it has the power to take you to a different place. In your handout packets, you'll have this, ground rules, if you will, and Dr. Landau will go into this in greater detail when he speaks, but these are some suggestions that show you the difference between listening, respectful speaking, and the kind of behaviors that will be discounting. And so I just point that out now, and we invite you, when we move into dialogue, to be thinking about these things as you interact. And so tonight, I'm now going to introduce, let me go back to this. My colleagues, and I'm going to turn it over to them. Sharita Hussain is a retired lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army Reserves after 35 years of service. She is also self-employed, and she serves as a community chaplain and volunteer spiritual counselor at the Islamic Society of Boston's Cultural Center. She's a founding member of the Association of Muslim Chaplains, and she's its treasurer. From 2006 to 2008, she co-hosted a weekly radio program on WRKO in Boston, Talking Religion, and she served as a chaplain at Tufts University during that same time. She's written a chapter in the book Spirituality, Women, Transformative Leadership, Where Grace Meets Power. She holds a graduate certificate in Islamic chaplaincy and an MA in Islamic Studies and Christian-Muslim Relations from Hartford Seminary. Sharita, welcome.
Hello, everyone. I'm really happy to be here. College students are my favorite people. When I was a chaplain at Tufts University, I really enjoyed your enthusiasm, your thirst for knowledge, the adventure, everything is happening all new. And I also loved that time in my life. I was in the military at the time. And so I am going to sort of challenge your listening as I'm sharing a little bit about myself. And I just want you to be aware if I may push any buttons, just sort of notice them and see, what you're experiencing. So I accepted this invitation, and it is really an honor for me to be on the panel of my teachers from Hartford Seminary. You guys were all my teachers at Hartford Seminary, and now I'm their peer on this panel, so it's really an honor. And why I accept this invitation, I'm really committed that one of my passion or my possibility is to live in a world that works and for it to be peaceful. And even more is to eradicate wars. What if we could use our words to resolve issues rather than our arms? And you may think that's normal or odd or appropriate for me to say, having been in the military for 35 years, I've always been a peacenik in there, hoping to defend and not be in the offensive, but to defend, because if someone attacks us, then we also need to respond back. So I'm also present to who I am and how I'm dressed. This is also a conversation. It's called a structural conversation. So the moment you see me, you already have assumptions that you've made about me. And so if you didn't hear my bio that I was in the military, you would think, oh, and you just saw me, you may make the impression that maybe some people think that I can't speak English because the way they speak to me, they speak very slowly. So when I speak back, I try to speak as American as I possibly can. And so I could feel welcome. Sorry. Oh, sorry.
I'm so sorry.
I'm a guinea pig here. What happened?
I don't know, it was working so fine before, and it is on. Now you're fading out. Maybe you just need to speak more into it. Hello? Hello?
Get closer.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Oh.
Sorry, so
Oh, okay. How's that?
See, now we can hear it.
Oh,
So I think
okay.
maybe it's just where you're,
Where am I?
yeah, that's perfect where you just were.
Sorry.
That's good. Thank you, I'm sorry.
Sorry. Oh, okay. So now, let me regroup. This is all part of the process here. So so getting back to my structural conversation, so then when I put on my uniform, there's this other structural conversation, and people will come up and thank me for my service. And also then, in my response, I'm not sure what to do or say. I just did my job or my duty. But if they only knew who I was as a Muslim, would they come up and thank me for my job? So these structural conversations are also part of the overall assumptions that we're making about people. So the other structural conversation I had was in joining the military. What do you think that structural conversation was?
Being a woman in the military?
Right. So I did basic training with men. It was this whole new, no longer the women Army Corps, we're all soldiers. And so yet there was a sense of having to prove myself. And why I'm sharing this with you is in the conversation doesn't need to always be in dialogue. And so, and I wanted to just present some part of my life experiences so you can have a sense of the conversation. So I wanted to also share the difficulty of part of our identities, and as I'm engaging you and I'm trying to explain to you about who I am, and trying to be accepted and welcome as a Muslim. I think I've gotten over the women thing, and I've gotten over the minority piece, but now I have to work on the religious piece. So you may also be in your life, what are these different issues? What are these different labels that we have that are if we belong to certain groups, or if we listen to certain types of music, are we being labeled in these ways? So what I what I wanted to talk a little bit about being different and being a Muslim, and I just wanted to be able to share a little bit that within being Muslim, there are about 1.4 billion Muslims in the world. There are 52 different majority Muslim countries, and so there's this cultural diversity. And even within the Muslim community, we don't know how to even speak well with each other, because there are language barriers, there are cultural barriers, and we're all thrown into the melting pot. So the United States is the melting pot. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here to share a little bit about that, and to get you to see maybe to help you shift your listening somewhat. And when we're trying to get into the other person's space, for what I normally do is I come from this space of acceptance. I come from the space of, and this may sound a little strange, but as a chaplain, from a space of love, a space of compassion, a space of understanding the other person. And I also come in this space that whatever you say to me, I can absorb it. And so imagine a time that you may have had that opportunity with a friend to just absorb it, and how did that feel? And how did that make the other person feel? So that's part of that deep listening. And in that deep listening, the rapport of trust begins. And as a chaplain, I've learned that, we take this oath of confidentiality, so whatever you say to us, we keep it. In your relationship with friends, it's important if a friend may not even say, don't share it with someone. And you keep that sense of confidentiality. If you need to say something, then ask permission of that individual to say, hey, could I share this information with another person? And if they say no, how do we honor that? Because we would also want the same opportunity to be reciprocated back to us. The other part of listening, I've had to have people say they don't like me, and I have had to be with that. And I don't like your religion because it's terrorists and they're going to kill us all. And I've had to absorb that. And why I've absorbed it is I want to help you then, when it's my turn to speak, to allow you, hope that you could also have that same respect for me. Also, suspending judgment. I've had to do that. In the big conversation now for chaplains, Muslim chaplains on campus is the LGBTQ conversation. And within our faith, there are some people that say that we, as chaplains, should not be engaging with individuals. And there's another camp, and I'm in the camp that each individual, we're all human beings, and it's up to God to judge, and you are, we will provide services for you, we will listen to you, we will support you. And so even within listening to people that are pro or con on this subject has been intense. Some people are not present to the listening. So when you are listening to certain things that don't fit your comfort zone, it goes against your beliefs. Are you willing to stretch yourself a little bit, to let that, to explore, to be in the unknown, and then grow? So I've had to do that in many situations, and I'm sure some of you had to do that. Show of hands, how many? And those that didn't raise your hand, you probably did, but don't want to raise your hand? Okay. And then at the end of the day, it's how can we agree to disagree, right? So you, yours, me, mine, but at least we gave respect and courtesy, and we did listen. And that, in the listening, is really, it says you value that person is important, and then you can continue the dialogue. And I'm sure how many in the group, again, have had their position changed by listening to someone. Yeah. Okay. So I'm seeing the 1 minute here. I just wanted to give some props to an organization that I did some amazing work. It's called the Landmark Forum. And it's an organization that allows you to take a journey into your life and do a self-examination. What shaped your values? Where did you get that? And then to go through some critical parts of your life from birth to about 15. And oftentimes, whatever happened in those early years sort of lives with us as we age. And if we could overcome hurdles from and sort of do the self-examination of those early years, it then also puts us in a space of feeling comfortable with others to have the difficult conversation because you've worked through your own personal issues already. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sharita. I want to introduce to you Margaret Kaiser. Shaped in her native South Africa. She was a student leader in the anti-apartheid struggle at the University of the Western Cape, where she was the first woman to attend its theological school. She then went on to do conflict transformation work at a grassroots level to help prepare ordinary citizens for the new South Africa. The work involved organizing, facilitating, mediating conflicts among groups, communities, diverse institutions, churches, schools, and workplaces. She continued to help local communities in the Western Cape embrace the truth and reconciliation process called forth by Nelson Mandela as the necessary means to save their nation at a decisive moment in its history. It was a process that brought people to a place of forgiving their enemies, even those who had brutally killed family members, by coming to discover their own humanity. In 1998, Margaret brought these experiences and skills to the United States, where she has spent the last 17 years working in several cities and states. She applied these skills effectively to transform conflict-ridden situations in schools and government agencies, trade unions, churches. She's always adapting these skills to the particular circumstances and contexts that are involved. She worked as an executive director for the Center of Conflict Transformation in Hartford, for which she received an award for her leadership. An adjunct professor at Hartford Seminary, you see the thread there, yeah. Director of training with Plowshares Institute and International Peace Building Institute, and executive director of the Greater Hartford Interfaith Coalition for Equity and Justice. And now she is an independent consultant at Margaret Kaiser Consulting. Margaret, welcome.
Good evening. Can you hear me? Can you? Good. You're still awake? You'll have a little bit of my South African humor tonight as well. I really thought I'm going to be last, Caronel. Sorry. This is good. This is good. So I just want to thank you, the Center for Global Initiatives here, Dr. Debbie, for this wonderful opportunity to be here tonight, for Dr. Caronel, for the opportunity to share with you my experiences, for this university, this college. It's just wonderful to travel from Northampton to a place like this. You are so privileged to be in a beautiful place. So it's wonderful, and thanks to Sharita and Yeheskel. Sharita, you just, made me so humble, and what a wonderful story you have. I sat there and I wondered, what if we could be at a place in our lives and in this nation and in my country and in this world where we don't have to explain ourselves and in the way you had to explain yourself, right? Mm-hmm. How many of us walk around and we don't have to explain ourselves? But that's the reality that we're living in. And that's why this topic is so important. It is just wonderful to know that we can talk about this, especially in my country, South Africa. We're going through a rough time. Our students are in the streets. They are boycotting. They're burning down our institutions because there's not enough money for their education. And it's about 20 years ago when we were able to have the dialogue that we're talking about right now. And because there's many factors for them being in the street, but one reason why they are in the street is because they weren't listened to. They had grievances through the years, and they weren't listened to. And this thing escalated, now they're in the street. That's our reality, right? We have situations in the US too, where if we don't sit down and listen, our conflicts can escalate very quickly. So, what brings me here? I grew up in South Africa, a country, and I'm not sure how much you know about the apartheid situation in South Africa, where segregation was legalized for a long time, where people of different colors and races were kept apart in what was called their own group areas. So I would be, if you look at me, somebody from mixed race, so-called colored person in my group, and so the blacks would be in their group, and whites over there, and Indians over here, Muslims over there, just a big mess, but neatly organized in segregated groups. It was an inhumane system of segregation where conversations and movement across racial lines were completely prohibited. I was married at the time with a white gentleman from Switzerland, and it was at a time when the Mixed Marriages Act was just scrapped, and we were able to get married. And it was called the Congress for Democratic South Africa. They had to learn how to listen, same skills. They had to learn how to talk with one another. They had to learn how to see the perspective from the other. And I call that being in each other's feet. So if you can write that down, kicking off our shoes tonight kicking off the fancy sneakers that we have, and being in each other's feet, meaning if we look at our feet, at the end of the day, my feet can be very sore, and in the summertime can be a little smelly and so forth, very uncomfortable. All of us have feet, and we can describe our feet, or we don't have to each other. And what I'm asking is, if we want to have real dialogue, then we will walk in the feet of the other that's different from me, smells different from me, looks different from mine. And if you want to be in my feet that's a little smelly at the end of the day, I'm inviting you for that to why am I using this metaphor of being in each other's feet and not just in the shoes? Why am I asking us to do that? Anybody? Yes.
Well, everybody has different kinds of shoes, but everybody has smelly feet, calloused feet, long toenails, short toenails. Everybody has that problem, whereas shoes, not everybody has shoes. Not everybody can afford the Gucci shoes or the nice sneakers.
Correct. Yes.
Shoes are nothing but inanimate objects. Feet are actual part of the person. In order to become that person, you have to take a part of that person and put them on yourself.
Precisely. Both and. Yes. So if we want to really understand where Sharita is coming from, right? Where I'm coming from a different country, and I don't know, maybe there's some others among you from different contexts, right? Or different states. We are not the same. If you really want to get to know each other, let's be in each other's feet. Let's be in each other's world in order to really understand what is so complicated. What's your humor like? How do you respond to conflict situations? So this is what I learned in South Africa. I'm carrying it through here. And in work with Palestinians and Israelis, and Yeheskel has been a dear colleague of mine. We've done some great work with people from the Middle East who would come here, your age, more or less, and help them be in each other's feet. I've done this across this country and other parts of the world, and I think one of the major things that I want to leave with you is if we don't listen, if we don't stop, and if we don't do the kind of things that Dr. Nell shared with us, then we may become people who would want to debate and who want to win all the time, and who will be on 91. We will drive on 91 and I will go south and you will come north and we will never meet each other. And so I am excited to be part of an evening. We will have more to share and invite you to really engage with us with your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Margaret. And now I want to introduce to you Yeheskel Landau. He is a dual Israeli-American citizen and an interfaith educator and consultant. He's active in Jewish-Christian-Muslim relations and in Israeli and Palestinian peacemaking for more than 35 years. While in Israel, he was executive director of, I can't pronounce it,
Oz v'shalom, nitivot shalom.
what he said, religious peace movement, and then he was co-founder and co-director of the Open House Peace Center in Ramla. He is the author of numerous articles and essays, as well as the research report Healing the Holy Land, Interreligious Peace Building in Israel-Palestine, published by the U.S. Institute of Peace and accessible online. From 2002 to 2016, he was the professor at Hartford Seminary and the first holder of the Abrahamic Partnerships Chair. Dr. Landau.
Shalom to all of you. Shalom. Assalamu alaikum. Peace and blessings be upon all of you. I'm also delighted and honored to be part of this conversation this evening. Thanks to Becker College, to the Brookfield Institute, and to you for coming, not just showing up, but being engaged. A little bit more about myself. I grew up in the United States, the New York area, spent about 10 years in New England, so this is my favorite time of year with the trees blazing all kinds of colors. And at the age of about 28, 29, I decided to put my body where my prayers already had taken me, and I flew to Jerusalem and stayed in the Holy Land, Israel, Palestine, for close to 25 years, becoming an Israeli citizen, raising a son who's now 28, and trying to do my humble best to break down the physical, if that's even possible, but even more essentially the psychological and emotional barriers that keep Jews and Arabs, Israelis and Palestinians apart. I don't know how many of you have actually visited the Holy Land. How many of you want to go? Great. I encourage you to go and not to be dismayed, discouraged by the bad news that comes out of there, which distorts the reality. 99.9% of life every day is not burdened by violence, although there are unequal accesses to power and political rights, so there's also systemic violence. But it is at least a safe place to go to explore in a micro-laboratory what is afflicting the human family everywhere. And after directing this religious peace movement for 10 years, in which our movement is a Jewish presence and witness in Israel between the secular left and the religious right-wing settlers who believe that in order for redemption to come, the Messiah to come, they have to be living in occupied Palestinian territories, and that God will help us win this war and control the whole land west of the Jordan River, which I think is a dangerous fantasy and has terrible repercussions, not just on Palestinians, but also for Israelis. And we are stuck in two different historical narratives competing for validation, legitimacy, vindication. And in many ways, they compensate for two collective victim scripts, two histories of trauma, going back especially to the 1940s, the Holocaust of the Jewish people in Europe, and the Nakba, the catastrophe for Palestine, where 750,000 Palestinians ended up in exile, refugees from their houses and fields and orchards as Israel came into existence. So you have this clash of worldviews based on two almost polarized subjective experiences. And now we have an ugly physical barrier, which we can call a wall or a fence, and in some places it's either one of those, snaking down the center of the land as Israel has tried to, the Israeli government has tried to make its citizens more secure, less vulnerable to people who would do them harm, especially strapping on explosives and blowing themselves up, which is what happened through the early 2000s in what's called the second insurrection, the second intifada. So this was a way to keep those perpetrators out of Israel proper. So a whole generation, your age, has grown up without any contact with the other side, the so-called enemy. So it was difficult enough when you could go in between Israel and the West Bank and Gaza Strip, which I did many times, but now you need a permit, and it's extremely difficult. So it makes it all the more difficult and all the more necessary to try to bridge the divide. One resource I would suggest to you, which I co-wrote recently with my life partner, Joyce Shriedman, is a booklet you can access online called How to Talk to Just About Anyone About Israel-Palestine. A 20-page guide. You could access it in exchange for your email address at this website, mybrotherfromanothermother.org. Okay, those of you who know something about the book of Genesis, that refers to Isaac and Ishmael, two sons of Abraham by different mothers, Sarah and Hajar. And this is a how-to, very practical manual, how to get the conversation started and how to avoid the minefields that may explode and the painful recriminations that too often erupt when discussing this very controversial topic. We use this also among Jews, and one of the exercises we used was called ouches and wows, in which, in a group setting, it can be also done between two people by mutual consent. When people get irritated, offended, upset, they are invited to say in real time, ouch! And then that irritation, or grievance even, has to be attended to in real time. The inverse of that is if somebody is delightfully amazed, she or he is invited to say, wow, I just learned something new and delightful, and I didn't know that about you. So both of those are learning moments that can be deepened to clarify what is that is similar, what affinities do we have, and also how can we learn from our differences without those differences threatening us. So the last thing I want to say is that I identify as a human being. And by that I mean I try to do justice. You know, we have bilateral symmetry. We have two legs and eyes and ears. So I try to balance the particularistic Jewish part of my identity and the universalistically human part of my identity. And that, to me, keeps me holistically Jewish. And from that place, I can talk to people who are too particularistic and maybe even ultra-nationalist or chauvinist of all persuasions, or those that, in my view, have favored the universalistic side of our identities and can't hear, so they can't empathize with people who are particularistic, whether they're Jewish, Muslim, Christian, gay, straight, whatever. So I invite you to think in your own terms what would be the parallel to being a human being. Okay, more later.
Thank you, Yehaskell. So I'm going to turn this back on. Here we go. So now we've talked a lot, and we want to invite you all to have some time to talk as well. So we're going to practice in pairs. And this is what we're going to ask you to do. And you can't leave the room. You have to do this, okay? We're going to ask you to pair with somebody that's sitting near you. If it's your absolute best friend and you know everything that they think and feel, maybe you want to turn in the other direction to somebody you've never met before. Okay? Choose a controversial topic, and we have some suggestions for you. Devin.
Well, my partner and I, and Raquel, we just kind of gave some facts about each kneeling in protest and Black Lives Matter because of, like, I don't know, our partner, I don't want to single her out, but she didn't know like much about either one.
So you were able to share so that you all had a better understanding of the issue, of all aspects of the issue.
Yes.
Better understanding. Okay. Anybody else? Yeah.
So I work with my partners, Haley and Nina. I actually brought up the conversation of existentialism and the meaning of life and the meaning of purpose. And I brought up the fact that I am nihilistic and that there is actually no meaning to life on a universal scale as well as an individual scale. And my partner Nina was talking that from her perspective, from a mother, the purpose as an individual is to bring yourself happiness, which is to bring your kids happiness and then your grandkids and so on, to continue that cycle. And what I did is I understood that because I understood a lot from my mother's experience, and I was beginning, since I am a young adult, I'm beginning to get into that mindset, so I agreed with her. And that I also said that, what is the purpose of the cycle? I questioned that and try to put that thought in my head, is the question, why is that cycle there and why does that cycle continue?
So just in that little brief 10-minute interaction, because it was a dialogue, you were able to get to someplace else.
Yeah.
Right. You don't have to change your opinion necessarily, you don't have to change your position on it, but your understanding is broadened. Maybe something you hadn't thought of before, or another perspective. I'm going to now open it up for questions of our presenters here, and I'll turn it over to them. So think back over all that they shared with us, or any other question that comes to mind that you want to ask them. Garrett.
This is going to be a question for Sharita. That's how I properly pronounce your name, right?
Perfect.
So you joined the military, and then did you choose to go to join the religion of Islam, or were you always Islamic during the military?
So I was born Muslim. I was born in a small island, Trinidad, of Indian descent. And when I came to the United States, we were cultural Muslims, or cafeteria Muslims. There's a terminology there. And when I joined the military, I was also Muslim, but I wasn't practicing. I started covering in my mid-30s. I sort of walked away. I was enough with patriarchy. I'm just going to live my life. I'm going to be very American. I'm done with all of that tradition, culture, religion. But somehow in basic training, I found God again to get through every day. I said my prayers at night, and wherever I went in the military, they found a place for me to pray, Germany, Panama, different places. So I came back to my faith through being a responsible parent and raising my daughter. And from there, I became the youth group director, and leadership by example. I had to get my act together. So now here I am, and then I became a chaplain, which sort of merged my whole world together. And my claim to fame is I was never allowed to be a chaplain in the Army. I can't lead men in prayer in my tradition.
Yes.
So since you're a Muslim, does your child have that choice to be of a different religion, like Christianity or Judaism?
Yes. My daughter, she's 33 years old. She doesn't cover. She does not dress like me. I am sure she does drink alcohol. So she is practicing and continuing being a Muslim, but not adhering fully. And I've come to terms with she's an individual human being, and she has to reconcile with God. I love her, and I pray that she abide by the religion, but I still love her as an individual. And if she chose to be a Christian, for me, the bottom line is, do you believe in God?
Oh.
Other questions? No other questions? Do you all, before we leave tonight, want to give you all last opportunity to add, your thoughts about one takeaway that people would have from this, and I'll bring the summary up as well. You want to start, Haskell?
Okay. I gave you two other handouts, which I did not refer to when I was standing at the podium. One is a dual narrative chart that Paul Sham, a political historian, has created. And if you look at the left side, you get about 10 points that the typical Israeli Jew would affirm about this conflict. And on the right side, you would have kind of consensus Palestinian perspective broken down on the same 10 points. So I encourage you to read those and see whether you incline toward one or the other, and whether you can hold them both in creative tension in your mind and heart. That's an invitation to you. The other one, which is called If Only, is a prayer poem that I composed originally back in January 2009 as a kind of self-therapy exercise to get through the anguish of the first of the three horrific wars, short-term and very destructive and lethal military engagements between Hamas in Gaza and the Israeli government and military. And I was actually in Israel visiting my son at the time of that campaign when it broke out. So back in the States, trying to deal with my own intense feelings, I wrote that appeal to anybody, and it went all around the internet. And I invite you to read it, internalize it, and on the back side, the reverse side of that one, is my email address. So you want to respond, please send me a message. So again, thanks for being part of this conversation.
Okay, so Margaret here, you have two handouts from me. I think it's back to back, the little circles and with a chart at the back. I just want to say a few things about that. Dialogue isn't easy, right? Dr. Nell was so good to show us those pictures. So if we watch CNN or MSNBC or Fox, for somebody like me and those of us who've done this work for so long, it's very difficult to watch these conversations. I'm not sure really what one should call them these days because of how people can talk over each other, right? So dialogue can work, and many of us are on social media, whether we tweet or on Facebook, right? Sometimes our conversations are going well, and other times maybe we've said something and may have upset a friend, or we get unfriended. Anybody in the room that's been unfriended at all? Now you see. But maybe it would be good for us to think about ourselves, what did work, or what is working when our conversations with our friends are going smooth, right? I think that's important to think about. Maybe it's about the willingness to be in the presence of the other and to maybe enjoy a cup of tea or a good conversation. So that first part is the willingness to be with the other. The moment we start talking about, say, the elections or some of these difficult issues that you have to talk about, that's where our dialogue skill is being tested, right? Because we grow up, and maybe our parents or wherever we grow up, our beliefs are being formed and shaped. And now we're here at college and I encounter somebody with a different belief, right? And I think what has helped me for so many years is to just be that listening presence. It's almost like when you go for a nap in the afternoon, those of you who really have to study at night and so forth, you have that nap, and when you nap, it's a restful experience. Listening is like that. When I try to be a listening presence, say with Yeheskel or with Sharita, I'm Protestant Christian, right? And here we have an incredible panel here of different belief systems. We haven't seen each other a long time. I might say, Yeheskel, you're Sharita, let's just go for a cup of coffee. I would really put my hat on of this listening presence phenomena to really understand where you're coming from. After so many years, what's been your experiences, and so forth, and put my own defenses on the side because it gives me an opportunity to broaden my understanding of where you two are coming from. So that is what I'm trying to do on that personal level. It's very easy to become defensive during these days. Students your age, you can go out into the world and wherever you're going to be in all these various states. Somebody said earlier she wants to go to South Africa. I said, great. Those are opportunities to really be in each other's feet, to give the other person's story a chance and not just my own story. So I think dialogue works if we do the listening, if you're willing to be exposed to the other. It shapes us. Sometimes we close the doors for dialogue, but we know when we close that door, our experiences get smaller, right? And the tension grows, and the conflicts can erupt with that. So my encouragement for you is to really use this time and era as an opportunity to say we are living in a country with diversity. We are not all the same. Let's not overlook that. Let's look at it as an opportunity to look at each other as fellow human beings. And I want to leave you with another word, and then I'm done. So remember the feet, being in the feet, right? The second word is an African word. It's called Ubuntu. You may have come across that. It's spelled U-B-U-N-T-U. And your Ubuntu says, Debbie, you from this context, right? And if Debbie and I have our conversation, you'll tell me where you're from and so forth, and I'm telling you where I'm from. So the point of our togetherness is that we are integrated human beings. I cannot be a human being without you. I cannot be a human being without Karen or Sharita or Yeheskel. They cannot be a human being without me. And this is what I learned from our beloved Desmond Tutu, who talks and preaches and he dances about it. So if we can take that and create our own Ubuntu as young people, boy, what a world this will be.
So as I reflected, so I'm 55 years old, I reflected most of my life at a very young age, sort of my coming to the United States as 11 in a foreign place, foreign ways of doing things. Fear was really present for me. And coming to when I turned 18 and joined the Army, I almost got liberated and fear went away. Part of the training, you feel confident, you feel strong. And then when 9/11 occurred, fear showed up again for me. And I'm 40 years old at this point. So fear has a sneaky way of really coming into our lives, and we almost always have to be on guard for it. And so when you're having, sometimes we may avoid having conversations that are necessary to have, and it will free us up, but that fear stops us. The antidote to fear is to really have courage. And sometimes you may need to have a buddy or a friend or somebody to be there with you to help you build your confidence. And so the antidote to fear, and fear, remember, it's sneaky. It will keep showing up. But fear can't show up if you have allies and you have trusted allies. So I share that with you because it will keep creeping in. I also have a handout in the packet, and it's some insights before having the difficult conversation. And so there are two parts to the conversations, right? The speaking and the listening part. The listening part really is the more powerful part, but many of us like to speak a lot more and hear ourselves. But in the listening part, you could provide a great deal of support to another person, and you haven't utter a word. And what it is with the eye contact, with the compassionate listening, with the presence there, and that person trusts you and believes in you and felt after sort of doing the brain dump, they will feel so relieved and they would be so appreciative of you. And it takes a lot to listen, right? Because this person could be rambling on and on and on, and you're doing your shopping list, or you're thinking about when you need to get your homework done. But if you stay in the present time with that person, you too, as the listener, will become transformed. Powerful listening and fear, sort of just play with those for the next, well, for the rest of your life, really, because we are human beings and we are meaning-making machines, and we're always speaking, and it's the way we communicate. I also want to leave a verse from the Quran. It's a small part of one of my favorite verses, and it says, "O mankind, we created you from a single pair of a male and a female, Adam and Eve, and made you into nations and tribes, that you may know each other, not that you may despise each other. Verily, the most honored of you in the sight of God is he or she who is the most righteous of you, and God has full knowledge and is well acquainted with all things." And so Adam and Eve were really all blood relatives here. We're cousins, and we're related. So if we just, from time to time, just remember that we are related as human beings. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just open for any last questions after hearing again from these folks. I want to thank you so much, and I want to thank Dr. Fontaine and President Johnson. Our thoughts are with him wherever he is. I want to bring us as a closing to this summary of the things that we talked about today. We talked about deep listening and suspending assumptions and judgments and keeping a sense of curiosity, of looking for common ground, choosing to be in relationship rather than winning, right? And agreeing to disagree, honoring the dignity. I also heard about structural conversations, about being in each other's feet, about saying yes and rather than yes but, and using ouches and wows. And so I want to say wow to all of you. Again, thank you. Our presenters will be here for a while still if you want to come up and speak to them face to face. Do you want closing words?
Say one last word. So thank you again, everyone, for coming out and to be with our panelists. I know it's a chilly night. You have a lot of homework to do. There's a lot going on at college. Or this week, we have kind of a somber culture here at Becker, but everybody came out regardless. So again, I also want to take this opportunity to thank the four of you for being here and your incredible experience in sharing with us. And even more so than hearing their experiences, the takeaways for effective and healthy dialogue, as Karen now just summarized. You've all been hearing about the Agile mindset, and you know that one of the components of the Agile mindset is social and emotional intelligence. And effective dialogue certainly comes under that. And that is one of, as we've been telling you, one of the big employability skills, so that when you go to apply for a job, a position, an internship, people really want to know, can you communicate well with others who are different from you? Do you have good intercultural awareness and skills, and skills of diverse peoples where you can communicate and be able to do all of these things rather than just getting angry with people or not being someone's friend when things get difficult. So we hope you've just been able to take away one or two or three things that you will remember that can help you with talking with your friends and your roommates, and especially around the Thanksgiving table, which often can be a source of tension with different points of view. So thanks again for coming. Have a great weekend.
Thanks.